Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing today, Ken?
I'm well. I'm very, very happy to be here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. You've joined us at episode 184. We've got three topics that we're going to be delving into today. First, our student check-in, where we look at something that students will come across during their study journey. And today we're going to be speaking about surviving counselling training. We're then moving on to the digital counselling revolution, where we explore how technology is used in delivering and how our clients consume counselling and psychotherapy now. And we're going to be going into a really important topic here of data protection. We're going to touch on GDPR. And even if you're not working online, this is going to be really, really important. And then we go into Practice Matters. Practice Matters, where we look at something that we would come across in the day-to-day running of a counselling or psychotherapy practice. And today we're taking a peek into practice, and we're going to be speaking with Paul Cullen, who's going to be speaking about his day of being a counsellor. But we're going to start with that student check-in. So, Rory, as we make this right now in real time, within the United Kingdom, at least, the colleges, universities, the private learning institutions have been given the green light by the government to be able to go back into delivering in-person content. So unis are back, colleges are back, many of the private learning institutions are back. So students there in class, and we need to get through these counselling studies, Rory, surviving counselling training.
It's true, and there'll be a lot of people who may be listening to this who are thinking about embarking on a journey into counselling. We get a lot of people who come across the podcast and think about wanting to train in counselling. And many years ago, I wrote a little ebook called How to Survive Counselling, a Student's Guide, to give people a realistic view of what counselling is. I think that sometimes there can be a little bit of a romantic view about counsellors and their work, but actually, as any student who's undertaken any of the classes and graduated, and even qualified colleagues will tell you, it is a demanding role and there's so much to it. And I wrote a little book, and I talked initially about what brings people to counselling. I think that's really an interesting investigation, what draws people to counselling. And there is a Greek mythology called Chiron. It's spelt with a K. It's very confusing, but that's Greek for you, isn't it? It's spelt with a K, but it's spelt with a C, sorry, but it's pronounced with a K. It's Chiron, and the wounded healer. And the idea that people who come to counselling may have had difficulties in their lives, and as part of their journey and growth and recovery, if you like, they want to help others. And it's a very noble position. And certainly that's been my experience of being a trainer and also a therapist, that we bring aspects of our own history into training to try and make sense of our own lives. And I think that's a really good starting point, Ken.
It is. And I think that we acknowledge that I think very few people, if sat down and asked, why did you want to become a counsellor, will say, because I wanted to be a multi-millionaire and climb the corporate ladder. It's not a motivator. The motivator is to be there for fellow humans. It's putting a hand into the darkness, is wanting to care and make a difference, is why majority of people that I've certainly spoken to started on the counselling journey. But along the line, we have to study. We have to do formal studies, and it can be academic in nature. It is academic in nature. We have to learn theories that we've never heard of before. We have to evidence our understanding of those theories in assignments, and it can be quite tricky. Generally, not always, but generally, someone going into counselling doesn't follow a regular academic progression route. And what I mean by that is school, college, university to become a counsellor. That would be kind of a pure academic route. Generally, it is a person who's gone out, lived some life, got some life experience, maybe had some life-changing experience in themselves, and go a person might go back to wanting to study counselling later in life. So there's a gap between the first time of being in education and the second time of being in education. As a result of that, we recognise that it's challenging. And that's why Rory wrote the book, How to Survive Counselling Training. Yes, it covers why you might have gone into it and asked some of the questions, frequently asked questions, but it also goes into things that you come across during your training journey, like finding a placement. Will I change? Will I change as a person during my studies? What it's like to have that first client contact. The little book walks you through that as well. Self-care, so important, because we're dealing with difficult and sometimes overwhelming information that may come at us while we're counselling. And in those early days, we need to look after ourselves to build up that robustness. And of course, in Rory's book, he also shares some useful resources. And I guess when we look at the whole arc of that journey, there's many different parts of it. You touched, Rory, on that starting point, thinking, do I want to become a counsellor? I guess our listeners will be a mixture of those, and of course some people that have finished that counselling journey that will maybe look back on their own journey and how that was for them. And in this little chat here, we hope to kind of cover some of those topics in Rory's book, but we're also going to be looking at some little hacks that you might be able to use within your lectures to make it easier for when you do face those assignments. So that's what you can get from our little chinwag today.
Yes, absolutely. And not everybody learns in the same way. A lot of people who come back to learning. I mean, I didn't have any qualifications until I was 41, I think. Or not any qualifications you could take to exchange for a job interview, that's for sure. And I found the journey quite challenging, because it's a minimum of a 4-year journey, really. Because you start with usually in the UK, I'm speaking here, usually a 10-week introduction course. And then you go on to do a certificate in skills, and then you do a 2-year diploma, or you could go on to university, do a master's degree. But it's going to take a large lump out of your life. And I think one hack there is to sit everybody down and if you're committed to do this journey, speak with your family and say, this is going to take at least 4 years of my life. And I'm going to pick up on what Ken said. People do change through the arc of courses. It's not unusual, and I don't want to scare people off for relationships to change or have to be renegotiated, because people grow on courses, and what usually happens is people say, well, I've always done this, but actually I'm going to do something else now. I want to find out who I am. So I think sometimes it's recognizing that you're on one journey, and maybe your partner or your nearest and dearest may not be on that journey, and to recognize that they may struggle in terms of change.
Ooh, yeah. And in terms of, I just wanted to jump in there, Rory, because I think that point is so important. I can definitely recognize it from my own journey. When I started my training, I was a corporate man with my suit and my tie. Things that were really important to me was paying off a mortgage and driving the right car. And through my journey, it got to a point where that wasn't important for me anymore, and I made a massive career change, and that was painful for my family. Because I was going through all these changes, and I was having this experience of being a student on a counselling course and experiencing internal change and enlightenment within myself. But the rest of my family weren't. And I think that's what you're alluding to, Rory, that, maybe it's about having a chat to your family. And if I was to put this kind of as relate it to something, it's like you leaving your family at home and then you going off on a trip anywhere in the world. I don't know, the Amazon jungle. Off you go to the Amazon jungle. You go and spend 2 months in the Amazon jungle. You have all those experiences, and then you go back and sit the family down and try and explain it to them. They might be interested in the trip that you've been on. You might be able to tell them about some of the things you've come across, but there's not a chance that they can understand it the way you did, because you lived it, you experienced it, you felt it, you smelt it, you tasted it. And that's what happens when you do studying. So you can often kind of find yourself a bit lonely along that road, that you're not able to share a lot of the experience and how it is for you with those closest, nearest, dearest to you. And of course, when we're speaking about that change that sometimes happens, sometimes that's within relationships. It's not uncommon to hear of people that go through a counselling journey that at some stage they find that maybe the relationship that they've been in for many years doesn't suit them anymore.
Absolutely, Ken. I used to sit down with students right at the beginning of the course where they came in for information sessions, and I would tell them this, and I would say, I think about 50% of the people on my diploma separated, and I would see that it wouldn't be as high. That was quite high, I think, but of all the diplomas I've taught, I know a lot of people who have moved on from relationships. And it's really interesting. You're absolutely right, Ken, when you say that you go on a journey that no one else has. My wife, I mean, we've been together, I think, 36 or 37 years now. There's parts of my professional life she doesn't know anything about.
Yep.
I don't talk about my clients. And one of the retorts when we have harsh words at Counselling Towers is my wife will say, "You're so philosophical, so philosophical."
That's a polite way of saying it, Rory.
And yes, and I think that usually means that I've not got as shall we say, as exercised about something as she has, because I can certainly, with other people's behaviour, it gives you an insight into why people behave as they are. So I think over the years, I've become more compassionate and more understanding of people's behaviour. It may not be acceptable, but my thinking will always trigger into why has that person behaved in that way, as opposed to look what they've done.
Yep.
And that only comes, I think, from training to be a therapist. But yeah, the remark of "you're so philosophical" usually ends some harsh words, and then we move on and we get a cup of tea and we're okay.
Like it.
Yeah.
Just recognizing that is will I change. Also covered in Rory's book, Finding a Supervisor,
Yes.
That First Client, that self-care, useful resources. And I wanted to focus a little bit on useful resources, Rory, because one of the questions, and frequently asked questions are often are mentioned in Rory's book as well, but one of the questions that comes up a lot is, am I academic enough? I wasn't maybe that brilliant at school. Am I too old to go into counselling, because I haven't been in studies for many years? And I think that it's worth acknowledging that as we kind of started this, we spoke about coming into academia, the world of academia, after being away from it for so many years. It's certainly changed from when I was at school. It's a different world. It's not recognizable from what I saw during my school studies. I certainly struggled at school, and I struggled a lot less when I entered academia. But there was I guess a mindset change along the way, because I lived most of my life thinking I wasn't academically inclined, and that question comes up a lot. And I think that should be kind of looked at in terms of what is available now to support someone as they come into studies. There's the technology that we have, and we'll kind of maybe give you some hacks that you can use. But from your perspective, Rory, of being a head lecturer within a learning institution for many, many years, what do you feel was the kind of experience of people coming in?
Well, I mean, I would say that for the people I taught, and most people, I mean, we did have some younger people, 25, 26, who wanted to become counsellors. But I think that the median age for counsellors is around 50. So we were getting people in their 40s coming through. And their experience was the start. They'd been to school. They'd been to school in maybe the 50s, 60s or 70s, where schools weren't as compassionate and understanding and didn't differentiate. That's the key thing, didn't differentiate between things like dyslexia and how people learn. And it was rote learning on the board, and you had to learn off the board. It just sends shivers down my spine now, Ken, thinking about it.
Me too.
And now, of course, we there's a lot of differentiation. There's a lot of technology. So, you can, with permission, you could record lectures. You can download the slide packs. You can get the slide packs off the virtual learning environment. There's lots of external support as well. I mean, Counselling Tutor, the website, counsellingtutor.com, is packed full of free resources that you can go to. and download. And, we make no secret, we have a membership site called the Counselling Study Resource, and people can join that for a very low fee. And we have huge amounts of supportive lectures. We have, I don't know, we thought about if it was in a building, not on a website, it'd cover acres. We've got so much information in there, so easily searchable. But I think one of the biggest things that's changed is that you get teachers like me and Ken. They're ordinary folk who've just trained. And I think that's the biggest thing. The stuffy teacher in the motorboard and the cape with the stick has thankfully long gone. And they're people who want you to succeed. They're people like you. So I think that's one of the biggest fundamental changes in education I saw, certainly in my time of teaching, Ken.
Yeah, and I think, we speak about, here's some hacks for you, by the way, and Rory's already mentioned them, and we speak about the technology has changed. When you're studying, there will undoubtedly be something called a VLE. And a VLE is a virtual learning environment, a place where your course materials will be stored by your university, your college, your learning institution that you can access. You can go on the computer, and you can look at your course. You can look at the handouts from your course. Back in my day, if you lost a piece of paper, that was the end of it, Rory. Now there's a place where you can go and log in and get that. And this day and age, you walk around and your mobile phone is a recording device. It's a camera. It's a video recorder. It's an instrument that you can take notes on. So we walk around with technology in our pocket. And some of the things you've already said, Rory, is with permission from your lecturer, record the lecture. So the lecture might be a theory lecture. It might be theory you haven't heard before. And you're going to hear that lecture maybe just the once. And then you're going to be expected to kind of recall information that either from your notes, the handout, or just thinking back of the lecture, and evidence your understanding of that in an assignment. So if you record the lecture on your phone, you've got it. And the technology is now as such that you can take a recording of something like a lecture, which is an audio recording. You can go on the internet and search the word transcribe. Transcribe is basically taking an audio file or a video file, changing it into text. For a very low fee, you can get that audio file transcribed into a page of text. So you can read what was said within that lecture. Always get the slide pack if you can, so you can revisit that. Slide packs are usually a condensed form of what the lecture contained. They usually contain some kind of bullet points. Rory spoke about Counselling Study Resources, which is our library for students. It's a paid-for library, as Rory said. But what we do within Counselling Study Resources is we have a lecture with a slide pack where the topic that is covered is kind of précis down or boiled down to the main points, and we make an audio file available and we make a transcript available. Now, the reason we do this is because we know that's what works. So if it works for the tens of thousands of students that have been through Counselling Tutor, Counselling Study Resource, it will work for you too, and you can do it yourself. Use your phone to take a picture of the flip chart. So if you work together as a group and you've got an exercise and you're writing stuff down on a flip chart, whip out your phone, take a picture of it. When you're doing your revision, you can go back to that flip chart and it's right there for you. And of course, one of the things is hitting the criteria. So often, what do we mean by hitting the criteria? And it's academic lingo, really, for evidencing you know what they're asking you. And they have a very structured way of doing this. And a great search is Bloom's Verbs. Go on Google and put in Bloom's Verbs. That's Bloom. And that is basically how the criteria is structured, by using Bloom's Verbs.
Yes. So Bloom's taxonomy, anybody who's done any teacher training will be familiar with Bloom's technology. And if you think of a very, very simple task you might give a child, you would send them maybe to the shop with a list. And a list is right at the beginning of how you learn. You make a list. So you go eggs, beans, tea bags,
more tea bags, lots of tea bags, Rory.
Tea bags. Cup, more tea bags. And that will be a list. So that's a very easy learning outcome. Make a list of what you see on the shelf. So that's the easy learning outcome. Now, as we're asked to think more and to kind of construct our ideas and be more kind of thoughtful in our studies, we may be asked to describe something. What does it look like? So you would describe something by giving points of description. So what does a car look like? Well, it's got 4 wheels. It's white. It could be black, or it could be green. It could be any color. It's got windows. A description. And then as we move further up for more in-depth thinking, we might be analyze. And analyze is where you get 2 things. You look at each thing individually, and then you share the differences, the things are the same, advantages and disadvantages. And then right up, you get evaluation, which is where you're having to kind of go very deep into the advantages, the disadvantages, how do things compare, how do they contrast, what other areas may they come into. So as we move up, and I think that is where people struggle, because in our everyday life, we're not, how often do I say does my wife say to me, can you go and analyse the tea bags, Rory, at the local shop? Doesn't happen, does it? Can you evaluate the cost of beans? Doesn't happen. We don't use those phrases in our everyday life. So when we're asked to do them academically, they can be a bit, I don't know. So look up Bloom's taxonomy and you will find lots of different views of it, but it will decode it for you. And also it's really worth looking at any literature you can find. It could be a newspaper article where someone says, I'm analysing it, shows how they break it down. But the big issue, I think, is because academic language isn't used in everyday conversation.
100%, and that's all it is. It's all just a little bit of a different language. If you want analysis, go to the news. They like to perform analysis on the news. Just listen to a news report and they're doing an analysis. But it's the way the questions are asked. They might say compare and contrast. And that is, if you go and look up Bloom's taxonomy, you will find the definition of compare and contrast. So you've got a way of decoding it. That's just a way of maybe hitting that criteria. There's so much we can cover here. And hopefully we've touched on some areas that interest you, maybe some areas that can aid you during your study journey. But we got a handout. It's called Surviving Counselling Training, a Student Guide. It's written by Rory Lees-Oakes. It's been revised many times. It's been downloaded tens of thousands of times. It is free. You can have it. We're making it today's Rory's super duper handout. And to get your copy of How to Survive Counselling Training, a Student Guide, just go to counsellingtutor.com. Go and find yourself our podcast tab. It's right at the top of the website, and find podcast episode 184. That's today's episode. On that page, you'll be able to download that super duper handout. Also at counsellingtutor.com, you can find out information about our counselling study resource as well. And on the same website, counsellingtutor.com, all the free resources and information available for you there. So there it is. That's our student check-in, moving away from being a student into the digital counselling revolution, where today we're going to be looking at protecting our clients' data. And we're going to look at that in regards to what legislation exists.
Digital Counselling Revolution.
Data protection.
Dun, dun, dun. Sorry, I had to do that, Rory.
Should we do that again? Data protection.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, it sends a cold shiver down everybody's spine, and it's one of the things that's talked so much about on our Facebook page. And if you're not a member of our Facebook page, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. You'll find us, we're a closed group, knock on the door, we're a friendly bunch. Come on in, and you'll meet thousands and thousands of like-minded people, students, qualified colleagues, tutors, supervisors. So come on in and join the party, join the conversation, and data protection comes up. Now, in the UK, and to be fair, Europe, in 2018, there was some new legislation. It actually was formed in 2016, but it actually became law in 2018, and that was the General Data Protection Regulations. And it causes a huge amount of confusion. And one of the pieces of confusion it does cause is for qualified practitioners, do I need to register with the Information Commissioner's Office, or the ICO, if I'm an independent practitioner? Well, the answer to that is, if you store any data, doesn't matter if it's an email or a phone number, client's data, client's phone number or client's information, it's stored electronically. You then have to register with the ICO, and it's I think it's £40 a year at the time we broadcast this, and if you go onto a direct debit, it costs you £35. And you go into the ICO website, you sign up, you have a look at what their recommendations are, and as long as you're storing the data safely and you're making sure that it's secure and that it can't be accessed by third parties, then you're going to be on the right side of the law. You're going to be giving your client the best service possible. But you do need to register. And I think it comes up a lot, this, Ken. People say, well, I'm not sure if I need to register. I only see 2 clients, or I don't store a lot of client data. If you capture any personal data of a client, you have to register. That's the end of it.
Yeah, I think the thing is, we're speaking about legislation here. So we're speaking about GDPR, which is applies to Europe and the UK. So if you are outside of Europe and the UK, have a look what the legislation says about how you store and manage data. But certainly in the UK and the EU, we fall under GDPR, and it's any data. So if you've got someone's telephone number, you're holding data, you're holding information on that person. If it's stored on your mobile phone, you have digitally stored that person, even if you store them as a contact. If I've got Rory's name and Rory's telephone number on my phone for business purposes, I'm storing his data. If I email Rory or Rory emails me, I've got his email address, I've got his name, I've got the information that is shared in his signature potentially. So we're storing information. It's any digital storage of any information. We need to look at how that is managed. And we are mandated. We don't get a choice of whether we want to do this or not. It's not a nice to have. It is legislation. It is the law. We have to do it. We have to comply. So the website, if you are in the UK, is ICO, that's letter I, letter C, letter O, .org.uk. That is the Information Commissioner's Office, and you can get information on GDPR there. Now, the next thing that I wanted to look at here is this data protection extends to more than just collecting people's data. If you've got a website, well, then you need to have a privacy policy, not a nice to have. You have to have it. And that privacy policy needs to outline how people's data is managed, collected by you, stored by you, for how long. You need to give all of the information. And you might think, well, I don't really collect people's information from my website. They just visit my website and there's a telephone number on there and they get hold of me, or an email and they get hold of me. So I'm not really collecting people's data. But you are. Because when somebody comes to your website, there is a digital footprint. It's called cookies. All your website is storing cookies, and you have to have a cookie policy. And if you've been online and you've been to a website where it has a little banner that says that you need to click and accept the cookies before you can continue, that is an example of where they are following the law, the legislation, and informing people of how data is collected. Even when you don't know that data is being left, a digital footprint is being left wherever you go on the internet. And if you've got a website, you need to have a privacy policy that tells people what they can expect when they reach your website, and what they need to do if they want to have access to their data, or if they want you to delete their data. There's a lot to it.
There is. And, if you are collecting data, use, say, Google Analytics to see how many people come in, or you have people's email addresses. You need a policy in place if someone wants to say they want to delete their data. And I think that's something that people need to look into. There are exceptions under GDPR. A lot of people think that a client could phone up and say, I want my data deleted. Well, actually, there are exceptions to data protection, because remember, when you stored your notes, for instance, which will probably link to your client's name and address, you have to keep them for a certain length of time. Now, the recommended time in the UK is 7 years after you've finished working with the client, or if it's a child client, 7 years after they become 18. So you have to store that for two reasons. One, your insurance company may require you to store information in case a complaint's made, and your ethical body would require you to store information. So if a complaint's made, they may ask you to refer to your notes, or you may have to refer to your notes. So you need to be clued up on data protection. And I would say the ICO are very helpful folk. When I phoned them up, they're based in Wilmslow, just down the road from where I live in the north of England. They're very, very, very helpful. They're not out to trick you or to catch you out. They're very open people. I've phoned them up on a number of occasions, and they've given great information. And some of it's quite flexible. It's not absolutely. There are things that you have to obey, laws you have to obey, but the interpretation of them can be quite flexible. So if you're unsure, I would give them a ring and check out. But the main thing is, if you're a private practitioner, you're collecting data, you really do need to register. It's a question that comes up a lot.
Yeah, and we have a lecture on GDPR specific in our Counsellor CPD library. We also cover this topic in great detail in our online and telephone counselling certificate course. If you're interested in any of those, just pop over to counsellingtutor.com. The information of how to get more info on that is right there. And I think the takeaway for me, Rory, is the saying of you don't know what you don't know. And, when it comes to things like... I was surprised, and I like to think that I've got a bit of an understanding of how website works and technical things. And I've been building websites for well over a decade now. But it still caught me by surprise that you build a website, anybody who visits it without you actually actively putting something on that website, that it's storing some kind of details on them called cookies. And an example of where you see cookies is if you go to a website that you maybe sign in with your username and password. When you get there, if your computer is remembering your username and password, that's a cookie. It's a little bit of information that is stored in your browser of who you are and what you normally do. And that is happening on almost all websites. Even without your knowledge, if you've got a website, chances are it is storing people's cookies, and we need to inform people about it. So it's what we don't know, isn't it? And hopefully that's what we do here at Counselling Tutor, is just raise awareness. We're not experts on GDPR, data protection. We turn to the experts. As Rory said, he's regularly chatting to the ICO. Yes. We don't profess to be the experts, but we definitely profess to start the conversation. So hopefully this conversation has sparked some interest for you. So there we have it. That is our digital counselling revolution, moving out of that into practice matters, where we dip our toe into the day-to-day running of a practice. And today, Rory, you spoke with Paul Cullen, so we're going to get a peek into Paul's practice. Can you give us a taster of what we can expect, Rory?
I can. We met up with Paul Cullen, who's from Thirsk in Yorkshire, a beautiful part of the world. I've known Paul for a long time. And he talked about his returning to practice after a time out of practice. And I think it's a very useful interview, because it shows that people can stop practicing, do other things, and come back. And he charts his journey and what he did to come back into practice. Talks a little bit about his day-to-day practice. It's a real insight into his world.
Practice matters.
And we welcome Paul Cullen, who's a qualified counsellor who practices independently in Thirsk. So welcome, Paul.
Well, thanks, Rory. Thanks a lot for having me here today. Thank you.
Yeah, and before we start off, you live in Thirsk, so can you tell everybody where Thirsk is in the world?
Well, Thirsk is in the beautiful part of North Yorkshire, and is probably most commonly associated with James Herriot and Old Creatures Great and Small. That's where he came from, in Thirsk.
Yes, and that would be, for those people for our international audience, that would be it's kind of northeast of England, isn't it? It's the eastern side of England, I think, isn't it? Yeah, and it is a beautiful place. So I think rolling green countryside, and beautiful views, and of course, near great industrial towns like Leeds and Harrogate, of course, a wonderful town. So some real history there, and some real beauty. So tell me, Paul, how long have you been practicing?
I've been practicing. I qualified in 2007, but I came back into practice. So I sort of left private practice once I'd qualified. I worked for a little bit longer, and then I came out of practice and focused on being a support worker. So I came back into practice probably about 3 years ago now. I'd originally been working in children and family services in various sectors, and then left a local authority to work for a project where I work in mental health and well-being. But it was a 3-year project, and it was going to be coming to the end in 3 years. I've never worked under a contract before, so I suddenly thought, well, what am I going to do? And my wife said, well, why don't you use this opportunity to go back into counselling? So it was more about coming back into counselling, which was scary once you've had the qualification, but then you kind of feel, oh, it's been quite a few years.
Yeah. So what was that like after taking a 3-year break to return back to be a practitioner? What steps did you have to take?
Well, the first thing was to kind of think about, well, catching up, So I started by contacting a voluntary place, here in Thirsk and that, who have a bank of counsellors, voluntary counsellors, and asked if they'd consider me for a placement. But again, there was sort of like that frightening idea of going back into the seat, and it put me in mind of when I was doing my diploma and you were going in to do your 100 hours and you were having that first client hour, and I felt so sort of nervous about how far behind I might be in sort of like the academic learning and the theoretical groundings, that I kind of didn't know where to begin. And it just so happened that the internet has massively changed from when I first qualified in 2007. The internet has just grown exponentially. So I was searching around. There's obviously a lot of websites, and that's how I happened to come across Counselling Tutor website. And then I found out I'm a big fan of podcasts. I love podcasts, Rory. And there was this podcast, and you were about 25 episodes in. And that, so I started listening. I listened to one episode of the podcast, heard a Mancunian accent, which was great because I'm from the north. So straight away I felt quite comfortable with that familiar accent. And then just went back and just listened to your podcast and that from episode 1. And it just gave me that boost and sparked that kind of that learning and reignited, those kind of memories of what I'd learned originally.
Well, that's lovely to hear, and yes, it sounds like my northern tones lured you in.
Exactly, lured me in like the Pied Piper of Manchester.
Well, there we go. It's not a title that I've had before, but I'll take it with some pride. I'm interested in how you managed to reintegrate into things like ethical bodies. What was the journey like to reapply for membership of an ethical body?
Well, I applied for at the time the BACP, so I was looking into whether or not my qualification was still relevant. So I spoke to the BACP, and one of the things that they were at the time rolling out was I think you've referred to it in the past as the BACP cycling proficiency. So there was the BACP's COP, which was a bit of an examination, and so I applied for that. And I remember actually putting a post on Counselling Tutor Facebook post, and you just sent a reassuring reply saying, it's a really straightforward sort of like examination situation. So I went along, and this was one of the last times they were doing face to face. So you went to a venue and you sat down. But I remember then walking into this. It was a hotel, and they had all these computers set up. And again, the way sort of like our feelings and our emotions and our childhood can can play with us and that, I was straight away catapulted back to being a child walking into an exam room and sitting down there, and there was this time constraint. So I had those feelings of anxiety and nervousness. But I sat down and I went through it. And for anyone who is looking at going through the BACP COP, it is very straightforward. If you've already have a qualification as a counsellor, you can go through this. It's not trying to catch you out. So it was an interesting kind of process. And then obviously I needed to get references from people that knew me in therapeutic terms, and also other professionals that knew me, to kind of give their recommendation to put me forward. So then, became a member of the BACP. And that just, again, gave me that confidence to kind of feel that I was able to kind of work effectively in this field. Because I think the return to counselling was around confidence, and it was around this feeling of imposter syndrome, of thinking, I'm really out of the game here. You always speak quite eloquently of students who were just qualifying, being right at the top of their academic learning, and I understand what you mean by that, because having been out of that for a while and then returning to it, you just think, there's a lot to catch up on. There's been a lot of changes, there's been a lot of growth in counselling and psychotherapy, since I originally qualified.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about managing those feelings of transference. I can't let any podcast go by without mentioning transference, being catapulted into our feelings of the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's interesting what you've described is returning back to practice after a break. I also think that we live in unique times. I mean, you return to practice right in the middle, I guess, or near at the time of the COVID epidemic.
Yeah, I mean, I was volunteering again, and then I felt confident and competent enough to start to look at opening up my own small private practice, and that was kind of working quite well. As well as having a full-time job, I had a small private practice, and it was going really well. And then suddenly, well, blow me if we're not hit with a global pandemic that completely changes the way we work in so many ways. And suddenly finding myself, thinking, well, I can't work face to face with clients anymore, which was unsettling and upsetting. And I'd thought about online working in the past. I know it wasn't huge, and we think about how it's massively changed how we work now as therapists. But I'd initially, and this goes back to the online mindset, I'd initially thought that it's not the same as face to face, not the same as face to face. And what I've had to learn and realize and really enjoyed is I think it can be just as powerful. And certainly, since I've gone and I've worked solely online at the moment, it's proven to be really effective and beneficial to clients. I've had a client who started working online and then got an opportunity for a job, and that client moved down south and carried on working online. So just that opportunity to have that consistency with their therapeutic support was massively beneficial. And again, the fear of starting to work online and learning about these new technologies. And again, I know this isn't an advert for Counselling Tutor, but your response at the time at Counselling Tutor to bring out this 80 hours of CPD, 80 at the time, for £49. I'm a northerner. I love a bargain, Rory. Absolutely love a bargain. So for that to have been so responsive at the time was perfect for me. Absolutely perfect. I could learn at my own pace, my own time. And it did. It really helped build my knowledge and understanding and confidence, and allowed me to continue to offer that knowledge and confidence to my client base.
Yes, I mean it sounds like a brilliant journey, retreading the steps not only of your training but having to retrain into a new way of working that the pandemic has kind of led us to, if you like. And you did allude to £49. Yes, we did release the course at £49 as a response to the pandemic. Slightly higher now, but it's still without this sounding like an advert for our course. It's still a incredible course. I think for what's being charged. Paul, it sounds to me like, through all this interview, it sounds to me there's a real passion that comes through in your voice for counselling. It's almost like a love you had, then you moved away from it, and then you were called back, and here you are still in practice. Yeah. And the viewers, the listeners won't be able to see this, but Paul's beaming with a smile when I say that. When I say that it's a real love. And I think your story also indicates that you're absolutely right. People can return to practice. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who you're going to reassure. They may be thinking, I did my counselling qualification, I did pass, but I'm not sure if I should be going back into practice. And if there is anybody out there, what would you say to them, to someone who says, I passed a few years ago, but I'm not sure if I want to go back?
Well, first, I think one of the things that you mentioned was about passion there, and if this is something that you're passionate about, then I think you just need to grab it. You need to go for it. It's about being ourselves, being who we are. For me, being a counsellor, and one of the things I've learned about, being a counsellor, it's not an act that I do. It's a part of who I am in all different aspects of my life. But the opportunities that are available now, again, I talk about the growth of the internet. Oh, wow, if this had been available and that when I was doing my diploma, when I was doing my portfolio, the amount of research, the amount of availability of kind of online study, the opportunity to kind of develop exponentially, your professional development, because there's so many different areas to do it. I think it's in a lot of ways, it's so much more accessible now. Just go for it. If that's what you want to do, if you're nervous about it, if you're curious about it, then just look into it and you'll see how much more opportunities are out there that are available now to kind of help build that confidence and help build that knowledge base and help you quickly realize that it's not changed dramatically. Therapy hasn't changed dramatically, and that still has, those fundamental foundations, those fundamental cornerstones. So just go for it, and learn to love it again, and that, as I did, and it's been the best decision that I've made. I've made terrible decisions in the past, and I've made some really great decisions, including my wife. But making this choice and decision to come back into therapy, and that has been, a remarkable learning curve, and that. But it's given me so much more confidence in this area now.
Well, on those inspirational words, Paul, I think we'll come to the end of the podcast. So, Paul Cullen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much to Paul Cullen. A big thank you to you, Rory, of course, for taking your time to do these peeks into practice. The thing about Peek into Practice that I like, it's a relatively new section. It comes under Practice Matters, but it's kind of really pulling back the curtain, having a look into what it's like to be in someone's practice, and I am finding it absolutely fascinating. And I do want to say, if you're in practice and you've got a story or a passion that you want to share, get in contact and email Rory at counselingtutor.com and tell us a little bit about yourself, your area of passion, and who knows, we might have a peek into your practice one day, should you wish it.
Absolutely. Let's hear from you, Rory at counsellingtutor.com. If you want to share, as Ken said, your practice or what you do, then drop me an email and we'll catch up.
So that was episode 184, Rory.
Absolutely. And we started off with looking at how to survive counselling training, something that I think a lot of people who go into counselling may utter to themselves as they go through the arc of their training. Then we looked at general data protection and an aspects of the law we have to abide by both ethically and legally. And then finally, we caught up with the wonderful Paul Cullen, who shared insights into his practice journey and his return to practice. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and hey, join the digital counselling revolution.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.